The second question that the jury is asked to consider when a defendant raises the defence of self-defence or prevention of crime is whether the force used was reasonable in the circumstances. So the best thing we can do first of all is trying to work out, what do we mean by reasonable force? So let's start by looking at what we mean by reasonable force. Now classically, reasonable force should not be excessive. So it shouldn't be over the top. So let's say, for example, that someone pushes me and I act in self-defense by punching them 6 times in the head. Most people would recognize that this isn't reasonable force in protecting me. It's excessive. The force used must be in proportion to the threat. So I suppose the best way of thinking about this is the scales that I've got on this slide. And perhaps jury members are asked to weigh up the threat towards the defendant on one side of the scales against and see if it balances against the force used by the defendant on the other side of the scale. So it's a sort of balancing act, isn't it? And saying, well, that person came at me with a knife, and so I think it was only fair and in proportion and not excessive and reasonable force to attack him back with a knife myself. That person punched me. It's okay for me to punch him. That person hit me 3 times. I hit him 3 times. So we're looking, I suppose, for a sort of balance. It's never going to be exactly like that, of course. And what we're going to see is that sometimes defendants, in defending themselves, can actually use a little bit more force than what they are being threatened with, which many people think is only right. In order for the jury to work out whether the force used by the defendant was reasonable, judges are now told to give the jury a certain amount of guidance, 2 bits of guidance, if you like. And the first one is that they remind the jury that we're not expecting a defendant in her frightened state to be exactly able to gauge the amount of force that was needed at the time. We give them a little bit of latitude. We say, well, someone in that state, we can't expect them to say, oh, I've already hit him 2 times, I shouldn't hit him a 3rd time. And so the jury's informed of this. And the second piece of guidance is that the jury's told that if the defendant believes and has said in court that they thought the force they'd used at the time was reasonable, then this is strong evidence that it is actually reasonable force. So once again, you can see with these 2 bits of guidance, the balance has gone slightly in favour of the defendant. We're giving them a little bit of latitude. We're saying to them, yeah, we recognise that in your situation, you were a bit frightened. We don't expect you. And if you believe that the amount of force was reasonable, then the jury's going to take that as strong evidence.